Have you ever met someone who seems to live more in yesterday than in today? Someone whose conversations always circle back to the good old days, who keeps relics from decades ago on every shelf, who can recount in vivid detail what happened 20 years ago but struggles to tell you what they had for lunch yesterday. Maybe that person is a parent, a friend, a partner, or maybe, if we're being honest, it's you. This isn't just nostalgia. Nostalgia is normal. Nostalgia is warm and fleeting. What we're talking about today is something deeper, something that can quietly take over a person's entire emotional life. It's an obsession with the past that shapes identity, distorts reality, and often blocks the path to genuine happiness. So why do some people become psychologically tethered to what's already gone? What happens inside the mind when someone can't, or won't, let the past die? And most importantly, is it possible to free yourself if you recognize this pattern in your own life? Let's begin by understanding the different faces this obsession can wear. On the surface, it often looks harmless, even charming. There's the proud grandparent who shows you faded photographs every visit. The music fan who insists nothing recorded after 1995 is worth listening to. The ex-athlete who still wears his high school championship ring. The woman who re-watches the same old movies because they just don't make them like that anymore. But beneath the surface, there are darker versions. The person who can't stop talking about an ex from 15 years ago. The adult who defines themselves entirely by a childhood trauma that happened 30 years earlier. The friend who brings up that one embarrassing moment you had in 2008 every single time you see them. These aren't just habits. These are psychological anchors keeping someone stuck in a chapter that should have closed long ago. Psychologists have several names for this phenomenon depending on the flavor it takes. Rumination on the past, excessive nostalgia, autobiographical fixation, or sometimes even past-oriented temporal bias. But whatever label we use, the core issue is the same. The mind has decided that the past is safer, more meaningful, or more real than the present or future. So what causes someone to develop this obsession? The first and most common driver is unresolved pain or trauma. When something deeply hurtful happens, abuse, abandonment, sudden loss, public humiliation, the mind often does something very clever and very dangerous. It freezes that moment in amber. By keeping the memory alive and raw, the brain believes it can eventually solve what happened, make sense of it, or gain control over it retroactively. Think of it like a computer that keeps running an unsolved program in the background, eating up processing power. The person may consciously say, "I just want to move on," but unconsciously, the mind refuses. It whispers, "If I keep replaying this, one day I'll finally understand why they left. One day I'll find the perfect comeback I should have said. One day I'll prove I was right." This is why many people obsessed with the past are actually stuck on negative events, not just happy ones. The brain is trying to repair a wound that never properly healed, and replaying the memory feels like tending to the wound, even when it's actually picking at the scab. A second major cause is identity fusion. Some people reach a point in life, often in adolescence or early adulthood, where they feel truly alive, truly themselves for the first time. Maybe it was during college, a first love, a golden era with friends, or a time when they were at the peak of their career or creativity. That period becomes the emotional high water mark. Everything afterward feels like a pale imitation. The mind starts to treat that era as the real me, and the present self as a disappointing sequel. Over time, the person begins curating their entire identity around that past version, wearing the same style of clothes, listening to the same music, telling the same stories, because to update the identity would be to admit that the best years are gone. This is especially common in people who experienced early success or recognition. Child actors, former athletes, one-hit wonder musicians, or anyone who peaked early often struggle terribly with this. Their sense of self got welded to a past achievement, and letting go feels like erasing who they are. A third driver is fear of an uncertain future. The past, no matter how painful, is known. The future is not. For people with high anxiety, low self-efficacy, or a history of repeated disappointment, the past can feel like the only stable ground in a world that keeps shifting under their feet. This is why economic downturns, pandemics, or rapid cultural change often trigger waves of intense nostalgia. When the present feels chaotic and the future feels terrifying, the mind retreats to a time that felt more predictable, even if that time was objectively worse. There's even fascinating research showing that people with depression are far more likely to have a past-oriented time perspective. In one large study, depressed individuals scored dramatically higher on measures of past negative focus and lower on future positive focus than non-depressed people. Their minds literally lived in yesterday because tomorrow felt either hopeless or non-existent. Now, let's talk about the personality traits that make someone especially vulnerable. People high in neuroticism, the trait linked to emotional instability and negative emotion, are prime candidates. They already tend to ruminate, so adding a temporal bias toward the past is like pouring gasoline on a fire. Perfectionists also struggle immensely. To a perfectionist, the past often contains the one mistake that ruined everything. They replay it endlessly, trying to mentally correct it, never accepting that life moved forward anyway. Interestingly, people with low openness to experience, the personality dimension linked to curiosity and willingness to try new things, are also at higher risk. If someone fundamentally dislikes novelty, the past becomes their comfort zone by default. And then there are attachment styles. Those with anxious or disorganized attachment often replay past relationships obsessively, trying to decode what went wrong or fantasizing about reconciliation. The X isn't just an X, they become a central character in an internal drama that never ends. So what actually happens inside the brain when someone is obsessed with the past? Neuroimaging studies show increased activity in the default mode network, especially the medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex, when people ruminate on autobiographical memories. That's the same network that lights up during self-referential thinking, "Who am I?" In other words, for these individuals, remembering the past and defining the self have become one and the same process. There's also often reduced activity in areas associated with future planning and imagination, like the hippocampus in perspective mode. The brain literally has fewer resources left for envisioning tomorrow because it's so busy reliving yesterday. Over time, this creates a vicious cycle. The more you focus on the past, the weaker your ability to imagine a different future becomes. The weaker your future imagination, the scarier the future feels. The scarier the future, the more you retreat into the past. Now, let's be very clear about the cost of this pattern. People who live in the past miss the present. They miss their children growing up because they're too busy mourning the babies those children no longer are. They miss new love because they're comparing every date to someone who's been gone for 10 years. They miss career opportunities because they're trying to recreate a role they had in 1997 instead of adapting to what's needed in 2025. They also distort reality. Memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction. Every time you recall something, you alter it slightly to fit your current emotions and beliefs. People obsessed with the past often end up with highly idealized versions of what actually happened. The old neighborhood wasn't that safe. The ex wasn't that perfect. That golden era band broke up for very good reasons. But the more you romanticize the past, the more the present looks gray and worthless by comparison. And perhaps most tragically, they rob themselves of agency. When your identity is rooted in who you were or what happened to you, you stop believing you can author who you become. Life starts to feel like something that happens to you rather than something you shape. So is there any hope for someone stuck in this pattern? Yes, but it requires deliberate, often uncomfortable work. The first step is simple awareness. You cannot change a pattern you refuse to see. Start noticing how often your mind drifts backward. Notice the emotional tone, longing, anger, regret, pride. Notice the triggers, certain songs, smells, places, people. Just observing without judgment begins to loosen the grip. The second step is grief work. Many people are obsessed with the past because they never properly mourned what was lost. Whether it was a person, a version of themselves, or a time when the world felt safer, that loss needs to be honored. Rituals help, writing a letter you never send, creating a memory box and then intentionally closing it, holding a private funeral for that chapter of life. Grieving is not wallowing. It's the bridge that lets you cross from the past into the present. Third, challenge the narrative. Write down your most repeated past story, then deliberately write 3 alternative interpretations. If your core story is, "I was betrayed and I'll never trust again," try versions like, "I was hurt, but I also learned what red flags to watch for," or, "That relationship taught me what I actually need in a partner." Memories aren't facts, they're stories, and you have more editorial control than you think. Fourth, Practice deliberate presence. Mindfulness meditation is powerful here, but so are simpler habits. Eating one meal a week with no phone, no music, no distraction, just tasting the food. Taking a daily walk where the only goal is to notice 5 new things. These exercises rebuild the brain's ability to inhabit the current moment. Fifth, create future memories on purpose. One of the cruelest tricks of past obsession is that it makes you believe life's best moments are behind you. Counter this by engineering small, intense, novel experiences now. Taking a class in something you've never tried, planning a trip somewhere you've never been, committing to a 30-day challenge. When your brain collects evidence that joy can still happen, the past loses some of its monopoly. Sixth, update your environment and social circle. If your home looks like a museum of 2005 and all your friends knew you when you're swimming against the current, change one room. Add one new friend who never knew the old you. Small external shifts signal to the brain that time is still moving. And finally, consider professional help. Therapies like EMDR for trauma, schema therapy for deep identity patterns, or even good old cognitive behavioral therapy for rumination can work wonders when self-help isn't enough. Sometimes an obsession with the past is the mind's way of protecting you from something it's not ready to face, and a skilled therapist can help you face it safely. Here's the truth no one wants to hear, but everyone needs to. The past is not a place you can live. It's a place you can visit, learn from, honor, and sometimes mourn, but it is not home. Home is now. Home is the breath you're taking while reading this sentence. Home is the life still left to be lived. The people who are most obsessed with the past are often the ones who loved deeply, risked boldly, felt intensely. That capacity didn't die, it just got pointed backward. The same heart that can mourn what's gone is the heart that can still build something new. So if this is you, if you've been living in yesterday longer than you've been living in today, know this: the door out of the past is not locked from the outside. You carry the key. It's heavy. It's scary. It requires you to step into a future you can't yet see. But every person who has ever built a meaningful second chapter did exactly that. They closed the photo album, not because they stopped loving what was inside, but because they finally believed there were new pages waiting to be filled. Your story isn't over. The best parts might still be unwritten. And the only way to find out is to turn the page.